Welcome, everybody. Happy Sunday. I hope you've all had a great weekend. I know I have. Welcome, everybody. This is, give me a second here to adjust my stuff. Jeez. We are broadcasting today on TikTok and YouTube and Facebook and everywhere else online that I can't remember offhand. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you have a paranormal issue or you think you have a paranormal issue, we can help you out. It might take us a while to get to you because California is this huge state, but we will get to you to help you out. In the case that we can't get to you right away, we do have psychics on staff who can do what we call a remote reading, and usually they can calm the energy down or whatever happens to be going on. Welcome, welcome. If that being said, you can find us all over the internet. Just Google California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team or Google California Haunts, and or California Haunts Radio rather, and you'll find us. That being said, if you're watching from Facebook, and a lot of you are today, please feel free to hit that follow button if you haven't done so already. We're always looking for followers. Also, if you like what you hear today, hit that thumbs up button, some smileys, those heart things that I can't do, and show me some love. Show me some love as far as the show goes, and do comment and do comment in the chat room because that does help us as well. And this is starting to fall. It's going to be one of those days. Hang on, bear with me. Okay, TikTok. It's because I have to have a weird setting on this, so you got to bear with me. I'm going to be kind of crooked. Today I'll be kind of crooked, TikTok, but I'm here. I'm trying to find a good way to do TikTok and do this at the same time, so I have to do it off to the right over here, and I have to put it up a certain way or the thing will topple over, and that's kind of what it's starting to do right now is kind of go over, and I'm trying to get this stuff to like stay where it's at without it collapsing down, because the last time I was on it dropped twice. Anyway, if you're watching from YouTube, it's the same thing over there. We're always looking for subscribers, so if you like what you see and hear today, so please be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already. And leave us some comments. That'll come through the chat room here as well. And thumbs up and all that good stuff, just to make us, feel good about what we do. Over here at TikTok, you guys know the drill. I have some night helms up there that I'm trying to do to make some extra money so that I can keep everything going and financed. If you could help me out with that, I have a 100 goal. You don't have to do it as you're not required. However, that would be nice if you see fit. If you're into ghost stories, this is the place to be. Okay. Also, double tap that screen so I get those hearts up there. I would like to get 1,000 likes today. If you guys can help me with that, double tap that screen once I start reading. That would be great. All right. Now remember, YouTube, I've got more than 900 videos sitting over there all of this show. We do broadcast Sunday through Friday, and we're going to be adding a Saturday show soon here. I don't know when, but we will be adding a Saturday show, kind of different topics that we're going to be doing. Anyway, for the people just coming in here that don't know what we do, this is California Haunts Radio. Sundays I do a reading day. We tell ghost stories. Some are true, some aren't, but I read from books about different hauntings and things like that. And this week we're reading from Scottish ghost stories, and these are reportedly true ghost stories. So hopefully you guys will enjoy it. Sit back, have your dinner, do whatever, and put your feet up and enjoy the show today, because we do this every Sunday. And like I said, I'd really appreciate it if you could double tap that screen for me, because I'm trying for 1,000 hearts. And like I said, you're not required to, but a couple helms here and there would be nice as well. We do other shows besides this, and tomorrow we will be doing a show on Inner Earth. So we do have different topics that we cover during the week, and that's over at youtube.com/@California Haunts Radio. So you can check us out over there. Okay, that being said, let's get rolling. And we left off in case it says, you know what, I don't do Roman numerals either. So I'm just going to guess that this is case 6. Oh, and it disappeared. Okay, oh good. Case VIII. So I'm figuring that's case 6, right? Okay, just a word of warning. This book was written in the mid to late 1800s. Oh wow, I didn't even see that mark. See, you notice things that you didn't feel before. Oh, I know what that is. Never mind. See that? I must have hurt myself. I was working out in my yard, so I've got like a thing on my arm. So, yeah. Okay. I didn't know I had a thing on my arm. I think I might have one on the other arm. Yeah, it's just a little bit of another one. Okay. Anyway, this book was written in the mid to late 1800s. So as far as being woke and like up to date, for the stuff that goes on today, you got to bear with me. Don't turn me into the internet police or anything if I end up slipping and saying something that maybe is kind of out of line. Because, like I said, 1800s, they didn't quite talk the way they talk now and things like that. So just bear with me and let's go with the flow, okay? All right, so we're talking case 6, I think, and it's called Pearlin Jean of Allenbank. And here we go. We are reading Scottish Ghost Stories. Few ghosts have obtained more notoriety than Pearlin Jean, the phantasm which for many years haunted Allenbank, a seat of the Stuarts. The popular theory as to the identity of the apparition is as follows. Mr. Stuart, afterwards created first Baronet of Allenbank, went on a tour in France, met a young and beautiful French sister of charity of the name of Jean, whom he induced to leave her convent. Tiring of her at length, Mr. Stuart brutally left her, and, returning abruptly to Scotland, became engaged to be married to a lady of his own nationality and position in life. But Jean was determined he should not escape her so easily. For him, she had sacrificed everything. Her old vocation in life was gone. She had no home, no honor, nothing. So she resolved to leave no stone unturned to discover his whereabouts. At last, her perseverance was rewarded, and, fortune favoring her, she arrived without mishap at Allenbank. The truth was then revealed to her. Her cruel and faithless lover was about to be wedded to another. But despair gave her energy, and burning with indignation, waiting for it to line up. I need a little bigger for my old eyes here, so hang on. She hastened to his house to upbraid him. She reached the spot just as he was driving out with his fiancée. With a cry of anguish, Jean rushed forward and, swinging herself nimbly onto the fore-wheel of the coach, turned her white and passionate face towards its occupants. For a moment, Mr. Stuart was too dumbfounded to do anything. He could scarcely believe his senses. Who on earth was this frantic female? Good heavens! Jean! Impossible! How on earth had she got here? And the beating of his guilty heart turned him sick and faint. Then he glanced fearfully and covertly at his fiancée. She must not know the truth at any cost. Possibly he lost his head. At all events, that is the kindest construction to put on the subsequent action, for, dastardly as his behavior had been to Jean in the past, one can hardly imagine him capable of deliberately murdering her, and in so horrible a fashion. Okay, remember, no one alive here. This is from the 1800s, so just bear with me. And please double tap that screen, show me some love. There was not a second to lose. An instant more, and the secret that he had so assiduously hidden from the lady beside him would be revealed. Jean's mouth was already open to speak. He waved her aside. She adhered to her post. He shouted to the postilion, and the huge lumbering vehicle was set in motion. At the first turn of the wheels, Jean slipped from her perch. Her dress caught in the spokes, and she was crushed unalived. Her fate does not appear to have made any deep impression either on Mr. Stuart or his lady love, for they continued their drive. Excuse me, my allergies. I apologize for that. The hauntings began that autumn. Mr. Stuart, as was only fit and proper, being the first to witness the phenomenon, returning home from a drive one evening, he perceived, to his surprise, the dark outlines of a human figure perched on the arched gateway of his house, exactly opposite the spot where Jean had perished. Wondering who it could be, he leaned forward to inspect it closer. The figure moved, an icy current of air ran through him, and he saw to his horror the livid countenance of the dead Jean. There she was, staring down at him, with lurid glassy eyes, her cheeks very white, her hair fluttering in the wind, her neck and forehead bathed in blood. Paralyzed with terror, Mr. Stuart could not remove his gaze, and it was not until one of the menials opened the carriage door to assist him down that the spell was broken, and he was able to speak and move. He then flew into the house, and spent the rest of the night in the most abject fear. After this, he had no peace. Allenbank was constantly haunted. The great oak doors opened. Let me wait for it to enlarge a little bit. It's working. Okay. The great... Whoa, what was this? Man, the great oak doors. Okay, hang on 1 second. This isn't right. Hang on. It skipped a page on me. Sometimes it'll skip a page on me, so let me just go back to where I was. The great oak doors opened and shut of their own accord at night, with loud clanging and bangs, and the rustling of silks and pattering of high-heeled shoes were heard in the oak-paneled bedrooms, along the many dark and winding passageways. From her attire, which was a piece of lace made... This thing's having issues. Just give me a second. Okay. From her attire, which was a piece of lace made of thread, the apparition became known as Pearlin Jane, and a portrait of her was actually painted. It is recorded that when this picture was hung between one of Mr. Stewart and his lady love, the haunting ceased, but that as soon as it was removed, they were renewed. Presumably, it was not allowed to remain in the aforesaid position long, for the manifestations appear to have gone on for many years without intermission. Most phantasms of the dead inspire those who see them with horror, and that is my own experience. But Pearlin Jane seems to have been an exception to this rule. A housekeeper called Betty Norrie, who lived for many years at Allenbank, declared that other people besides herself had so frequently seen Jean that they had grown quite accustomed to her, and were consequently no more alarmed at her appearance than they were by her noises. Another servant at the house, of the name of Jenny Blackadder, used to constantly hear Jane, but could never see her, though her husband did. The latter, when courting Jenny, received a rare scare, which suggests to me that Jean, in spite of her tragic ending, may not have been without a spice of humor. Thomas, for that was the swain's name, made an assignation one night to meet Jenny in the orchard at Allenbank. It was early when he arrived at the trysting place, for Thomas, like all true lovers, was ever rather more than punctual, and he fully contemplated a long wait. Judge, then, of his astonishment when he perceived in the moonlight what he took to be the well-known and adored figure of his lady love. With a cry of delight, Thomas rushed forward, and, swinging his arms widely open to embrace her, beheld her vanish, and found himself hugging space. An icy current of air thrilled through him, and the whole place, trees, nooks, moonbeams, and shadows, underwent a hideous metamorphosis. The very air bristled with unknown horrors, till flesh and blood could stand no more. And, even at the risk of displeasing his beloved Jenny, Thomas fled. Some few minutes later, at the appointed hour, Jenny arrived on the scene, and no one was there. She dallied for some time, wondering whatever could have happened to Thomas, and then returned, full of grave apprehensions, to the house. It was not until the next morning that the truth leaked out, and Jenny, after indulging in a hearty laugh at her lover, who felt very shamefaced now that it was daylight, sensibly forgave him and raised no obstacle when asked to fix the day for their marriage. In after years, Jenny used to retell the story with many harrowing allusions to Pearlin Jean, whom she somewhat foolishly made use of as a boogie to frighten children into being good. A Mr. Sharp, who when he was a little boy was once placed in her charge, confesses that he was dreadfully scared at her stories, and that he never ventured down a passage in those days without thinking Pearlin Jean, with her ghostly blood-stained face, claw-like hands, and rustling lace dress, was after him. Nurse Jenny used to tell him that the Stewarts tried in vain to lay Jean's spirit, actually going to the length of calling in 7 ministers to exorcise it. But all to no purpose. It still continued its nocturnal peregrinations. In the year 1790, the Stewarts let the house to strangers, who, when they took it, had not the least idea that it was haunted. However, they did not have long to remain in ignorance, for 2 ladies who occupied the same bedroom were awakened in the night by hearing someone walking across the floor. The presence did not suggest burglars, for the intruder behaved in the most noisy manner, pacing restlessly and apparently aimlessly backwards and forwards across the room, swishing the floor with what sounded like a long lace train, and breathing. They were both terrified, and so cold that they could hear one another's teeth chatter. They were too frightened to call for help. They could only lie still, hoping and praying it would not come nearer to them. The sufferings of these two ladies were indescribable, for the ghost remained in their room all night, moving restlessly about until daybreak. It was not until some days later, when other people in the house had experienced the phenomenon, that they were told the story of the notorious Pearlin Jean. But was the so-called Pearlin Jean really the apparition of the unalive Frenchwoman? To my mind, her identity with that of the beautiful Sister of Charity has not been satisfactorily established, and I think there are reasons to doubt it. If, for instance, the apparition were that of a Sister of Charity, why should it appear incongruously attired in a long trailing gown of lace? And if it were that of a woman of the presumably staid habits of the Sister of Charity, why should it delight in mischief and play pranks of a poltergeist? And yet, if it wasn't the ghost of Jean, whose ghost was it? All right. Case 7, the drummer of Kortashi. I hope I said that right. Okay, I'm going to go up a little bit more here. Just give me a second. If it blows me out, I'm not going to be very happy. Let's see. Okay. What ancient Scottish or Irish family has not its family ghost? A banshee, the heritage of Niall of the 9 hostages, is still the uninviolable possession of his descendants. The O'Donnells and I, who I am a member of the clan, have both seen it and heard it several times. As it appears to me, it resembles the decapitated head of a prehistoric woman, and I shall never forget my feelings one night when aroused from slumber by its ghastly wailing. I stumbled frantically out of bed, and, groping my way upstairs in the dark, without venturing to look to the left or right, lest I should see something horrible, found every inmate of the house huddled together on the landing, paralyzed with fear. I did not see it on that occasion, but on the following morning, as I had anticipated, I received the news that a near and dear relative had passed away. Possessing such an heirloom myself, I can therefore readily sympathize with those who own a similar treasure, such, for example, as the famous or rather infamous drummer of Kortashi Castle. I hope I said that right. I apologize if I didn't. Who is invariably heard beating a tattoo before the death of a member of the clan of Ogilvy. Mrs. Crowe, in her Night Side of Nature, referring to the haunting, says, Miss D, a relative of the present Lady C, who had been staying some time with the Earl and Countess at their seat near Dundee, was invited to spend a few days at Kortashi Castle, with the Earl and Countess of Airlie. She went, and whilst she was dressing for dinner, the first evening of her arrival, she heard a strain of music under her window, which finally resolved itself into a well-defined sound of a drum. When her maid came upstairs, she made some inquiries about the drummer that was playing near the house. But the maid knew nothing of the subject. For the moment the circumstance passed from Miss D's mind. But, recurring to her again during dinner, she said, addressing Lord Arley, My lord, who is your drummer? Upon which his lordship turned pale. Lady Arley looked distressed, and several of the company, who had all heard the question, embarrassed. Whilst the lady, perceiving that she had made some unpleasant allusion, although she knew not to what their feelings referred to, forbore further inquiry till she reached the drawing-room, when, having mentioned the circumstance again to a member of the family, she was answered, What? Have you never heard of the drummer boy? No, replied Miss D. Who in the world is he? Why, replied the other, he is the person who goes about the house playing his drum. Whenever there is a death impending in the family, the last time he was heard was shortly before the death of the last countess, the Earl's former wife. And that is why Lord Airlie became so pale when you mentioned it. The drummer boy is a very unpleasant subject in this family, I assure you. Miss D was naturally much concerned, and indeed not a little frightened at this explanation, and her alarm being augmented by the hearing of the sounds on the following day, she took her departure from Kortashi Castle, and returned to Lord C.'s, where she related this strange circumstance to the family, through whom the information reached me. This affair was very generally known in the north, and we awaited the event with interest. The melancholy death of the Countess about 5 or 6 months afterwards at Brighton sadly verified I can't even say this word. I'm sorry. Sadly verified the The forthcoming dream. That's what it is. Okay. I have heard that a paper was found in her desk after her death, declaring her conviction that the drum was for her. Mrs. Crow goes on to explain the origin of the phenomenon. According to legend, she says, there was once at Cortacci a drummer, who, incurring the jealousy of the then Lord Airlie, was thrust into his own drum and flung from a window of the tower, in which, by the way, Miss D slept, before being put to death. Thus, the drummer is stated to have said he would forever haunt the Airlie family, a threat that has obviously been permitted to fulfill. During one of my visits to Scotland, I stayed some days in Forfarshire, not far from Cortacci. Among the visitors at my hotel was a very old gentleman of the name of Porter, who informed me that, when a boy, he used to visit some relatives who, at that time, lived within easy walking distance of Cortacci. One of these relatives was a lad of about 14 named Alec, with whom he had always been the closest of friends. The recollection of their many adventures evidently afforded Mr. Porter indefinite amusement, and one of these adventures, in particular, he told me, was as fresh in his mind as if it had happened yesterday. Looking back upon it now, he said, with a faraway look in his eyes, it certainly was a strange coincidence. And if you are interested in the hauntings of Cortacci, Mr. O'Donnell, you may perhaps like to hear the account of my ghost experiences in that neighborhood. Of course, I replied, that nothing would give me greater pleasure, and Mr. Porter forthwith began his story. One misty night in October, my friend Alec and I, both being keen on rabbiting, determined to visit a spinney adjoining the Cortacci estate in pursuit of our quarry. Alec had chosen this particular night, thinking, under cover of the mist, to escape the vigilance of the keepers, who had more than once threatened to take him before the Lord for trespassing. To gain access to the spinney, we had to climb a granite wall and drop on the other side. The drop, in addition to being steep, being rendered all the more precarious by reason of the man-traps the keepers were in the habit of setting. When I got astride the wall and peered into the well-like darkness at our feet, and heard the grim rustling of the wind through the giant pines ahead of me, I would have given all I possessed to have found myself snug and warm in bed. But Alec was of a different kidney. He had come prepared for excitement, and he meant to have it. For some seconds we both waited on the wall in breathless silence, and then Alec, with a reckless disregard of what might be in store for him, gently let himself drop, and I, fearing more, if anything, than the present danger to be forever after branded as a coward if I held back, timidly followed suit. By a great stroke of luck we alighted in safety on a soft carpeting of moss. Not a word was spoken, but, falling on hands and knees, and guiding ourselves by means of a dark lantern Alec had brought second-hand from the village blacksmith, we crept on all fours along a tiny bramble-covered path that, after innumerable windings, eventually brought us into a broad glade shut in on all sides by lofty trees. Alex prospected the spot first of all to see no keepers were about, and we then crawled into it, and, approaching the nearest burrows, set to work at once with our ferrets. 3 rabbits were captured in this fashion, and we were eagerly anticipating the taking of more, when a sensation of icy coldness suddenly stole over us, and, on looking round, we perceived, to our utmost consternation, a very tall keeper standing only a few yards away from us. For once, in a way, Alec was nonplussed, and a deathly silence ensued. It was too dark for us to see the figure of the keeper very distinctly, and we could only distinguish a gleaming white face set on a very slight and perpendicular frame, and a round glittering something that puzzled us both exceedingly. Then a feeling that perhaps it was not a keeper gradually stole over me, and in a and in a moment of ungovernable terror, I caught hold of Alex, who was trembling from head to foot, as if he had the ague. The figure remained absolutely still for about a minute, during which time neither Alec nor I could move a muscle, and then, turning round with an abrupt movement, came towards us. Half dead with fright, but only too thankful to find that we had now regained the use of our limbs, we left our spoil and ran for our lives in the direction of the wall. We dared not look back, but we knew the figure had followed us, for we heard his footsteps close at our heels, and never to my dying day shall I forget the sound, rat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat, for all the world like the beat of a muffled drum. How we ever managed to reach the wall I could never tell, but as we scrambled over it, regardless of man-traps and bruises, and plunged into the heather on the other side, we heard the weird footsteps receding in the direction of the castle, and ere we had reached home, the rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat had completely died away. We told no one a word of what had just happened, and a few days after, at the same time with the death of one of the Earlys, we learned, for the first time, the story of the Phantom Drummer. I have little doubt, Mr. Porter added, in conclusion, that the figure we took to be a keeper was the prophetic drummer, for I can assure you there was no possibility of hoaxers, especially in such an ill-omened guise, anywhere near the Cortacci estate. Poor old Mr. Porter. He did not long survive our story. When I next visited the hotel, some months later, I was genuinely grieved to hear of his death. His story had greatly fascinated me, for I had loved the solitude of the pines, and have myself, from time to time, witnessed many remarkable occult phenomena under the shadow of their lofty summits. One night, during the second visit of mine to the hotel, the mood to ramble came upon me, and, unable to resist the seductive thought of a midnight stroll across the bracken-covered hills, I borrowed a latchkey, and, armed with a flask of whiskey and a thick stick, plunged into the moonlight night. The keen, heather-scented air acted like a tonic. I felt younger and stronger than I had felt for years, and I congratulated myself that my friends would hardly know me if they ever saw me now. As I swung along with the resuscitated stride of 20 years ago, the landscape for miles around stood out with startling clearness in the moonshine, and I stopped every now and then to drink in the beauties of the glittering mountain ranges and silent glimmering tarns. Not a soul was about, and I found myself, as I loved to be, the only human element in the midst of nature. Every now and then a dark patch fluttered across the shining road, and with a weird and plaintive cry, a night bird dashed abruptly from hedge to hedge, and seemingly melted into nothingness. I quitted the main road on the brow of a low hill, and embarked upon a wild expanse of moor, lavishly covered with bracken and white heather, intermingled with which the silvery surfaces of many a pool of water. For some seconds I stood still, lost in contemplating the scenery, its utter abandonment, and the grand sense of isolation, and inhaling, at the same time, long and deep draughts of the delicious moorland air, unmistakably impregnated now with breaths of ozone. My eyes wandering to the horizon, I detected on the very margin of the moorland a dense clump of trees, which I instantly associated with the spinney in my old friend Mr. Porter's story, and, determining that the renowned spinney should be my goal, I at once aimed for it, vigorously striking out along the path which I thought would be most likely to lead to it. Half an hour's brisk walking brought me to my destination, and I found myself standing opposite a granite wall, which my imagination had no difficulty in identifying with the wall so well described by Mr. Porter. Removing the briars and gorse prickles, which left little of my stockings whole, I went up to the well, and, measuring it with my body, found it was a good foot taller than I. This would mean rather more climbing than I had bargained for, but the pines, the grim silence of their slender frames and gently swaying summits fascinated me. They spoke of possibilities few could see or appreciate as I could, possibilities of a sylvan phantasmagoria, enhanced by the soft and mystic radiance of the moon. An owl hooted, and the rustling of brushwood told me of the near proximity of some fur-coated burrower in the ground. High above this animal life, remoter even than the tops of my beloved trees or the mountain ranges, etched on the dark firmament shone multitudinous stars, even the rings round Saturn being plainly discernible. From the Milky Way, my eyes at length wandered to the pines, and a puff of air laden with the odor of their resin and decaying brushwood decided me. I took a few preliminary sips of whiskey, stretched my rusty limbs, and placed one foot in the jagged crevice of the wall, swarmed painfully up, So I'm painfully up. How slow and how hazardous was the process? I scratched my fingers, inured to the pen, but a stranger to any rougher substance. I ruined my box calf boots. I split my trousers at the knees, and I felt that my hat had parted with its shape for over, and yet I continued the ascent. The end came all too suddenly. When within an ace of victory, I yielded to impulse, and with an energy the desperate condition of my skin, the clothes alone, could account for. I swung up, and the outer edge of the wall melted beneath me. My hands frantically clutched at nothingness. A hideous sensation of falling surged through my body and brain. My ears and eyes filled to bursting, and with a terrific crash that seemed to drive my head and my spine right through my stomach, I met the black, uprising earth and lost consciousness. For me, I had pitched head first into a first bush, which broke the fall. Otherwise, I must have met with I would have been seriously injured. As it was, when I recovered my momentary loss of consciousness, I found that I had sustained no worse harm than a severe shaking, scratches galore, and utter demolition of my clothes. I picked myself up with difficulty and spent some time searching for my hat and stick, which I at length discovered, lodged, of course, where one would least have thought of looking for them. I then took close stock of my surroundings and found them even grimmer than I had even anticipated. Though the trees were packed closely together and there was much undergrowth, the moonbeams were so powerful and so fully concentrated on the spinney that I could not see no inconsiderable distance ahead of me. Over everything hung a solemn and preternatural hush. I saw shadows everywhere, shadows that defied analysis and had no material counterparts. A sudden crashing of brushwood brought me to a standstill and sent the blood in columns to my heart. Then I laughed loudly. It was only a hare. It was only a hare, the prettiest and purtiest thing imaginable. I went on. Something whizzed past my face. I drew back in horror. It was a bat, merely a bat. My nerves were out of order. The fall had unsteadied them and me. I must pull myself together. I did so and continued to advance. A shadow, long, narrow, and grotesque, fell across my path and sent 1,001 icy shivers down my back. In an agony of terror, I shut my eyes and plunged madly on. Something struck me in the face. My eyes opened involuntarily, and I saw a tree that, either out of pique or sheer obstinacy, had planted itself halfway across the path. I examined its branches to make sure they were branches and continued my march. A score more paces, and a sudden bend, and I was in an open space, brilliantly illuminated by the moonbeams and peopled with countless moving shadows. One would have to go far to find a wilder, weirder, and more grimly suggestive spot. As I stood gazing at the scene in awe-struck wonder, a slight breeze rocked the tops of the pine trees, and moaning through their long and gloomy aisles, reverberated like thunder. The sound suggesting slightly, ever so slightly, a tattoo, brought with them vivid pictures of the drummer. Too vivid, just then to be pleasant. And I turned to go. To my unmitigated horror, a white and lurid object barred my way. My heart ceased to beat. My blood returned to ice. I was sick, absolutely sick with terror. Besides this, the figure held me spellbound. I could neither move nor utter a sound. It had a white, absolutely white face, a tall, thin, perpendicular frame, and a small, glittering, rotund head. For some seconds it remained stationary, and then, with a gliding motion, left the path and vanished into the shadows. Again a breeze rustled. It rustled through the tops of the pine trees, moaned through long and gloomy aisles, and reverberated like thunder, rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. And with this sound beating in my ears, reaction set in, and I never ceased running till I had reached my hotel. Case 8. The room beyond account of the hauntings at Henner's lay near Ayr. It's A-Y-R, Ayr, I'm assuming. Again, I'm reading from Scottish Ghost Stories, and this is because these were written into late 1800, into 1800s, and towards 1946. They're all copyright free, so that's why we're doing this. To me, Hendersley is what the transformation scene at the pantomime was to the imaginative child. The dreamy child of long ago, a floral paradise full of the most delightful surprises. Here at Hendersley, from out quite the quite recently icebound earth, softened and moistened now by spring rain, there rises up a row upon row of snowdrops and lilies, of such surpassing sweetness and beauty that I hold my breath in astonishment and ecstatically chant a Te Deum to the fairies for sitting such white-clad loveliness. And then, ere my wonder has had time to fade, it is summer. The ground opens, and there springs up on all sides a veritable sea of vivid, variegated color. Scarlet, pink, and white geraniums, red, white, and yellow roses, golden honeysuckle, bright-hued marigolds, purple pansies, pale forget-me-nots, wallflowers, sweet peas, many-tinted azaleas, showy hydrangeas, giant rhododendrons, foxgloves, buttercups, daisies, hollyhocks, and heliotropes, a floral host too varied to enumerate. Overcome with admiration, bewildered with happiness, I kneel on the soft carpet of grass, and burying my face extravagantly in all alternate laps of luxurious, downy-scented laden petals, fill my lungs with soul-inspiring nectar. My allergies would never tolerate this. My intoxication is barely worn off before my eyes are dimly conscious that the soil all around me is generously besprinkled with the remains of my floral friends. I spring hurriedly to my feet, and gazing anxiously about me, sadly perceive the gaily nodding heads of new arrivals, dahlias, sunflowers, anemones, chrysanthemums. As I continue gazing, the aromatic odor of the mellow apples from the Hendersley orchards reaches my nostrils. I turn round, and there in front of me, I see row upon row of richly laden fruit trees, their leaves of brilliant copper and the scintillating rays of the ruddy autumn sun. I gasp for breath. The beauty of tint and tone surpasses all that I have hitherto seen. It is sublime. The grand climax of transformation. As the curtain falls with the approach of winter, I hurry to my Edinburgh home and pray for the prompt return of early spring. For many years, my aged relatives, the Misses Amelia and Deborah Harbordines, lived at Hendersley, rarest and kindest of old ladies. They were the human prototypes of the flowers both they and I loved. Miss Amelia, with her beautiful complexion, rounded form, and regal mien, suggested to my childish mind more, much more, than the mere semblance of a rose. Whilst Miss Deborah, with her sprightly grace and golden hair, was only masquerading as a woman. She was in real life a daffodil. Unlike so many of the fair sex who go in for gardening, my aunts were essentially dainty. Their figures were shapely and elegant, their hands slim and soft. I never saw them working without gloves, and I have good reason to believe they anointed their fingers every night with a special preparation to keep them smooth and white. They were decidedly not brainy. Neither were they accomplished, never having made any special study of the higher arts. But they evinced, nevertheless, the keenest appreciation of painting, music, and literature. Their library, a large one, boasted a delightful harbourage of such writers as Jane Austen, Miss Mitford, and Maria Edgeworth. And in their drawing room, on the walls of which art was represented by the old as well as modern masters, might be seen and sometimes heard, for the Misses Harbordines often entertained a well-tuned Broadwood and a buckskin harpsichord. I will describe this old-world abode, not as I first saw it, for when I first visited my aunts, Amelia and Deborah, I was only 1 year old. But as I first remembered it, a house with the glamour of a many-gabled roof and diamond window panes. The house stood by the side of a turnpike road, that broad, white, interminable road, originating from the goodness knows where in the north, and passing through Ayr, the nearest town of any importance, to goodness knows where in the south. A shady avenue entered by a wooden swing gate bearing the superscription Hendersley in neat white letters, led by a circle route to it, and not a vestige of it could be seen from the road. In front of it stretched a spacious lawn, flanked on either side, and at the farthest extremity by a thick growth of chestnuts, beeches, poplars, and evergreens. The house itself was curiously built. It consisted of 2 stories and formed a main building and one wing, which gave it a peculiarly lopsided appearance that reminded me somewhat of Chanticleer, with a solitary, scant, and chipped appendage. It was often on the tip of my tongue to ask my relatives the reason of this singular disparity, whether it was the result of a mere whim on the part of the architect, or whether it had been caused by some catastrophe. But my curiosity was always held in check by a strange feeling that my relatives would not like to be approached on the subject. My aunts Amelia and Deborah belonged to that class of people, unhappily rare, who possess a power of generating in others an instinctive knowledge of dangerous ground, a power which enabled them to avert, both from themselves and the might-be offender, many a painful situation. To proceed, the nakedness of the walls of Hendersley was veiled. Who shall say it was not silently veiled by a thick covering of clematis and ivy? My eyes are just really weird today. I apologize, you guys. I was out working in my yard, and I think it's allergies, and it's just insane with my contacts. So I apologize. And in the latter, innumerable specimens of the feathered tribe found a sure and safe retreat. On entering the house, one stepped at once into a larger hall. A gallery ran round it, and from the center rose a broad oak staircase. The rooms, with 1 or 2 exceptions, opened into one another, and were large and low and long in shape. The walls and floors were of oak, and the ceilings were crossed by ponderous oak beams. The fireplaces, too, were of the oldest fashion, and in their comfortable ingle nook my aunts in the winter loved to read or knit. When the warm weather came, they made similar use of the deep-set window-sills over which they indulgently permitted me to scramble onto the lawn. The sunlight was a special feature of Hendersley, forcing its way through the trellis panes. It illuminated the house with a soft golden radiancy I have never seen elsewhere. My relatives seemed to possess some phenomenal attraction for the sunlight, for, no matter where they sat, a beam brighter than the rest always shone on them. And when they got up, I noticed that it always followed them, accompanying them from room to room and along the corridors. But this was only one of the many pleasant mysteries that added to the joy of my visits to Hendersley. I felt sure that the house was enchanted, that it was under the control of some benevolent being who took a kindly interest in the welfare of my relatives. I remember once, on the occasion of my customary good morning to Miss Amelia, who invariably breakfasted in bed, I inhaled the delicious odor of the heliotrope. It was wafted towards me in a cool current of air, and as I approached her bed, and seemed, to my childish fancy, to be the friendly greeting of a sparkling sunbeam that rested on Miss Amelia's pillow. I was so charmed with the scent that, alas, forgetful of my manners, I gave a loud sniff, and with a rapturous smile ejaculated, "Oh, Auntie, cherry pie!" Miss Amelia started. "Dear me, child," she exclaimed, "how quietly you entered. I had no idea you were here in the room. Heliotrope is the name of the scent, my dear, but please do not allude to it again. Your Aunt Deborah and I are very fond of it." Here she sighed. "But for certain reasons you would not understand. Would you not like to hear the word heliotrope mentioned? Kiss me, dear, and run away to your breakfast." For the first time in my life, perhaps, I was greatly puzzled. I could not see why I should be forbidden to refer to such a pleasant and harmless subject. A subject that, looked at from no matter what point of view, did not appear to me to be in the slightest degree indelicate. The more I thought over it, the more convinced I became that there was some association between the scent and the sunbeam, and in that association I felt sure much of the mystery lay. The house was haunted, agreeably, delightfully haunted by a golden light, a perfumed, radiant light that could only have been, in my mind, one origin, one creator, Titania, Titania, queen of the fairies, the guardian angel of my aged and extremely aged relatives. Aunt Deborah, I said one morning, as I found her seated in the embrasure of the breakfast room window crocheting, Aunt Deborah, you love the sunlight, don't you? She turned on me with a startled face. What makes you ask such a strange question, child? She said, of course I like the sun. Most people do. It is no uncommon thing, especially at my age. But the sunbeams do not follow everyone, Auntie, do they? I persisted. Miss Deborah's crochet fell in her lap. How queerly you talk, she said, with a curious trembling of her lips. How can the sunbeams follow one? But they do, Auntie, they do indeed, I cried. I have often watched a bright beam of golden light follow Aunt Amelia and you, in different parts of the room, and it has settled on your lace collar now. Miss Deborah looked at me very seriously, but the moistening of her eyes I attributed to the strong light. Esther, she said, laying one of her soft hands on my forehead, there are things God does not want little girls to understand. Question me no more. I obeyed. But henceforth I felt more than ever assured that my aunts consciously or unconsciously shared their charming abode with some capricious genie, of whose presence in their midst I had become accidentally aware. And to find out the enchanted neighborhood of its mysterious retreat was to me now a matter of all-absorbing importance. I spent hour after hour roaming through the corridors, the copses, and my beloved flower gardens, in eager search of some spot I could unhesitatingly affirm was the home of the genie. Most ardently, I then hoped that the sunbeams would follow me, and that the breeze charged with cool heliotrope would greet me as it did Aunt Deborah. In the daytime, all Hendersley was sunshine and flowers, and stray where I would. I never felt lonely or afraid, but as the light waned, I saw and felt a subtle change creep over everything. The long aisles of trees that in the morning only struck me as enchantingly peaceful and shady, gradually filled with strangely terrifying shadows. The hue of the broad swords deepened into a darkness I did not dare interpret, whilst in the house. And whilst in the house, in its every passage, nook, and corner, a gloom arose that seeming to come from the very bowels of the earth, brought with it every possible suggestion of a boogie. I never spoke of these things to my relatives, partly because I was ashamed of my cowardice, and partly because I dreaded a fresh rebuke. How I suffered, and how I ridiculed my sufferings in the mornings, when every trace of the darkness was obliterated, and amid the radiant bloom of the trees I thought only of the heliotrope and the sunbeams. One afternoon, my search for the abode of the genie led me to the wingless side of the house, a side I rarely visited. At the foot of the ivy-covered walls, and straight to the center, was laid a wide bed of flowers, every one of which was white. But why white? Again and again I asked myself this question, but I dared not broach it to my relatives. A garden all white was assuredly an enigma. Enigma. I don't know why I can't say these words today. There is undoubtedly a key. Was this garden, which was all white, in any way connected with the sunbeams and heliotrope? Was it another of the mysteries God concealed from little girls? Could this be the home of the genie? This latter idea had no sooner entered my head than it became a conviction. Of course, there was no doubt whatsoever it was the home of the genie. The white petals were now a source of peculiar interest to me. I was fascinated. The minutes sped by, and still I was there. It was not until the sun had disappeared in the far distant horizon, and the grim shadows of twilight were creeping out upon me from the neighboring trees and bushes, that I awoke from my reverie and fled. That night, unable to sleep through the excitement caused by my discovery of the home of the genie, I lay awake, my whole thoughts concentrated in one sole absorbing desire, the passionate desire to see the fairy of Hendersley. I had never heard of ghosts, and hear any stories. My bedroom was halfway down the corridor, leading from the head of the main staircase to the extremity of the wing. After I said good night, I did not see my aunts again until the morning, but they never by any chance visited me after I was in bed. Hence I knew, when I had retired for the night, I should not see human face nor hear a human voice for nearly 12 hours. This, when I thought of the genie, with its golden beams of light and scent of the heliotrope, did not trouble me. It was only when my thoughts would not run in this channel that I felt any fear, and that fear was not of the darkness itself, but what of the darkness suggested. On this particular night, for the first few hours, I was sublimely happy, and then a strange restlessness seized me. I was obsessed with the wish to see the flower garden. For some minutes, stimulated by a dread of what my aunts would think of such a violation of the conversationality on the part of a child, I combated furiously with the desire, but at length the longing was so great, so utterly and wholly irresistible, that I succumbed, and, getting quietly out of bed, made my way noiselessly into the corridor. All was dark and still, stiller than I had ever known it before. Without any hesitation, I plunged forward, in the direction of the wingless side of the house, where there was a long, narrow, stained window that commanded an immediate prospect of the white garden. I had seldom looked out of it, as up to the present to this side of the house had little attraction for me. But all was changed now, and, as I felt my way cautiously along the corridor, 1,001 fanciful notions of what I might see surged through my brain. I came to the end of the corridor. I descended half a dozen stairs. I got to the middle of the gallery overlooking the large entrance hall. Below me, above me, on all sides of me, was Stygian darkness. I stopped, and there suddenly rang out, apparently from close at hand, a loud, clear, most appallingly clear, blood-curdling cry, which, beginning in a low key, ended in a shriek so horrid, harsh, and piercing, that I felt my heart shrivel up within me, and in sheer desperation I buried my fingers in my ears to deaden the sound. I was now too frightened to move, one way or the other. All of the strength departed from my limbs, and when I endeavored to move my feet, I could not. They appeared to be fastened to the ground with lead weights. I intuitively felt that the author of the disturbance was regarding my terror with grim satisfaction, and that it was merely postponing further action in order to enjoy my suspense. To block out the sight of this dreadful creature, I clenched my eyelids tighter together, at the same time earnestly imploring God to help me. Suddenly, I heard the low wail begin again, and then the echo of a far-off silvery voice came softly to me through the gloom. "It's an owl, only an owl." With lightning-like rapidity, the truth then dawned on me as I withdrew my clammy fingertips from my ears. The faint fluttering of wings reached me through an open skylight. Once again I moved on. The gallery was left behind, and I was well on my way down the tortuous passage leading to my goal, when a luminous object of vast height and cylindrical shape suddenly barred my progress. Overcome by a deadly sickness, I sank on the floor, and burying my face in my hands, quite made up my mind that my last moments had come. How long I remained in this position I can't say. To me it seemed eternity. I was eventually freed from it by the echo of a gentle laugh, so kind and gay, and girlish, that my terror at once departed. And, on raising my head, I perceived that the cause of my panic was nothing more than a broad beam of moonlight on a particularly prominent angle of the wall. Heartily ashamed at my cowardice, I got up and, stepping briskly forward, soon reached the stained-glass window. Pressing my face against the pane, I peered through it, and there, immediately beneath me, lay the flowers, glorified in dazzling gold by the yellow color of the glass. The sight thrilled me with joy. It was sublime. My instinct had not deceived me. This was indeed the long-looked-for home of the genie. The temperature, which had been high abnormally for so long for June, now underwent an abrupt change, and a chill current of air sweeping down on me from the rear made my teeth chatter. I involuntarily shrank back from the window, and, as I did so, to my utter astonishment, it disappeared. and I saw in its place a room. It was a long, low room, and opposite to me, at the farthest extremity, was a large bay window, through which I could see the nodding tops of the trees. The furniture was all green and of a lighter, daintier make than any I had here seen before. The walls were covered with pictures, the mantel shelf with flowers. Whilst I was busily employed noting all these details, the door of the room opened, and the threshold was gorgeously illuminated by a brilliant sunbeam, from which suddenly evolved the figure of a young and lovely girl. I can see her now as I saw her then, tall and slender, with masses of golden hair, waved artistically aside from a low forehead of snowy white, finely penciled brows, and long eyes, the most lustrous violet, a straight, delicately molded nose, a firm, beautifully proportioned chin, and a bewitching mouth. At her bosom was a bunch of heliotrope, which deftly undoing, she raised to her nose and then laughingly held out to me. I was charmed. I took a step forward towards her. The instant I did so, a wild look of terror distorted her face. She waved me back. Something jarred against my knee, and in the place of the room, I saw only the blurred outline of the trees through the yellow window panes. Bitterly disappointed, but absolutely sure that what I had seen was objective, I retraced my steps to my bedroom and passed the remainder of the night sound asleep. After breakfast, however, unable to restrain my curiosity longer, I sought Miss Amelia, who was easier to approach than her sister, and, managing, after several efforts, to screw up courage, blurted out the story of my nocturnal escapade. My aunt listened in silence. She was always gentle, but on this occasion she surpassed herself. "I'm not going to scold you, Esther," she said, smoothing out my curls. "After what you have seen, it is useless to conceal the truth from you. God perhaps intends you to know all. Years ago, Esther, this house was not as you see it now. It had 2 wings, and, in the one that no longer exists, was the bedroom you saw in your vision. We called it the green room, because everything in it was green. Your Aunt Alicia, an aunt you have never heard of, who slept there, having a peculiar fancy for that color. Alicia was our youngest sister, and we all loved her dearly. She was just as you described her, beautiful as a fairy with golden hair and violet eyes, and she always wore a bunch of heliotrope in her dress. One night, Esther, one lovely calm midsummer night, 40 years ago, the house was broken into by burglars. They got in through the green room window, which was always left open during the warm weather. We, my mother, your Aunt Deborah, and I, were awakened by a loud shriek for help. Recognizing Alicia's voice, we instantly flew out of bed and summoning the servants. Tore to the green room as fast as we could. To our horror, Esther, the door was locked, and before we could break the lock, the ruffians had murdered her. They escaped through the window and were never caught. My mother, your great-grandmother, had that part of the house pulled down, and on the site of it she planted a white garden. I just heard a beep. I hope you guys can still hear me. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know why it beeped, because we should have full power in this thing. Though Alicia's earthly body died and was taken from us, her beautiful spirit remains with us here. It follows us about in the daytime in the form of a sunbeam, whilst occasionally at night it assumes her earthly shape. The house is what is generally termed haunted, and no doubt some people would be afraid to live in it. But that, Esther, is because they do not understand spirits. Your Aunt Deborah and I do. Do you think, Auntie, I asked with a thrill of joy, do you think it at all likely that I shall see Alicia again tonight? Aunt Amelia shook her head gently. No, my dear, she said slowly. I think it will be impossible, because you are going home this afternoon. And that's it. So there we have it for this week's read. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Let me shut this bad boy off here. I thank you all for joining me. Tomorrow I will be back. Well, actually, tomorrow we have a tape show, and it is going to be God, I'm having time. It's going to be Andrew Goff, and he's going to be talking about Inner Earth, and that'll be 6:30 p.m. Pacific, the usual time. For you guys over on TikTok, if you can still hear me, that will be youtube.com/at California Haunts Radio. So you can check us out, and that will be 6:30 p.m. Pacific. So Andrew Goff will be here tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. So have a great night, everybody, and I'm going to sign off of TikTok here. See y'all. Okay. And for you guys over here on the regular live, thank you for coming. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. Equal opportunity. Always equal opportunity here at California Haunts Radio. Anyway, thank you so much, and I will see you tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Pacific with Andrew Goff. Have a great evening, guys.